Hi class, this is our last lesson. So we're going to look at reproduction in plants. So we're going to start with asexual reproduction and then get to sexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction is where you have an offspring that is going to be genetically identical. Usually, wrong color, it is through mitosis. Okay, so they are going to be identical. There's different forms, can be called vegetative reproduction. They can be used by splitting the roots. Sometimes they will have kind of the little buds that produce on the leaves. It just depends on the type of plant that you are looking at. There's advantages and disadvantages to asexual reproduction. One of the advantages is it doesn't require a lot of energy to do so, and you only need one plant, and usually there's a higher survival rate. It only really works well when the conditions are ideal, so there's lots of nutrients that it needs and the organism's been well adapted. Disadvantaged, if something comes in and wipes out the population, it will wipe out the entire population because there's no genetic variation. So the lack of variation, and it only selects for individuals that are good for that trait. So again, leads to your lack of genetic variation. Sexual reproduction in plants can happen different ways depending on if it's an angiosperm or a gymnosperm, so flowering versus cone-bearing plant. Okay, and so when we're looking at sexual reproduction, it allows for more genetic diversity, but requires more energy as well. So it adds time, it adds energy, and you need two parents. There are seeds that are produced that allows for the dispersal of seeds, so less competition, and the seeds can remain dormant if the conditions aren't favorable. So we're going to look at your cone-bearing plants first for your sexual reproduction. Okay, and so you have male and female cones. Male cones are usually softer and smaller. Female cones are going to be kind of like the harder and larger ones. And so we'll kind of look through how that happens. So you start off with these haploid microspores that are produced because of meiosis. So we're getting meiosis back here. These haploid microspores will undergo mitosis to create these pollen grains, and that's your male gametes. Where the female gametes are going to be called macrospores. Males are going to be micro, females are going to be macrospores. And the macrospores are also produced through meiosis. They'll undergo mitosis and produce your egg or your ovum, your female gametes. Okay? Your pollen grains are going to be usually spread through wind from the male to the female cone. Then you will have your fertilization, pollination, and then fertilization happening. And we'll kind of go through that in a little bit later slides. So when you're looking at it, you have your male, and you are going to have your microspores create. Then you're going to undergo mitosis, and then you're going to get these pollen grains. Female is going to be the larger, harder cone, and it's undergo meiosis for macrospores, and then eventually it will lead to your surviving egg. Then you will have your pollination, your fertilization happening, and then you will develop into your cone-bearing trees. Flowering plants are going to be a little bit different. These are known as your angiosperms, okay? And so they will have usually both male and female reproductive structures. So they kind of have both male and female organs. The male organs is the stamina. You can kind of see here. It produces your pollen. And it has the anther and the filaments. So you have where the pollen grains are produced, as well as the filament that allows for it to be really high up above the female reproductive organs to allow for self-pollination if we're looking there. Then you're getting into the female, it's kind of over here, and that's going to be the pistil or the carpel. It's going to have the stigma, which is the sticky surface that allows for pollen to attach to. The style is going to be the long tube that connects to the ovary, and the ovary contains the ovule and the seed. So you can kind of see you have your sticky surface, your tube, and then you have the ovary that contains the ovule, and then maybe eventually lead to the seed. Okay, so the plants will have, flowering plants will have specialized structures, especially if it's looking for cross-pollination, self-pollination, if it pollinates through wind or by a pollinator. If it's going to have a pollinator come in, it's going to want a brightly colored flower. It's going to make sure that it's not deep enough that they can't get in. And then it's also usually the pollen is going to be sticky so that it attaches to the pollinator. Where if you have a flower that's going to pollinate through wind. Usually it's going to be more of a dry pollen and easy to kind of be released when the wind, so like your dandelions. How you get your male and your female gametes in your flowering plants are going to be similar but a little bit different. Okay, and so again, you still have your microspores that are produced through meiosis, and then you still have your mitosis producing your pollen grain. That's going to be similar. It's just going to happen instead of a cone, it's going to happen in the anther. The female is going to have your megaspores again through meiosis. Then it's going to produce 4 haploid megaspores. Similar to us, only one is going to survive. That one is going to undergo 3 rounds of mitosis. And then one of those is going to produce the egg. So when you're looking here, you have your megaspore. It undergoes meiosis. All of them die but the one. Then the one undergoes 3 rounds of mitosis, and then you get your specific egg. And that egg or ovum will then be fertilized by the pollen grain, again, depending on if it is self or cross fertilization. And we'll go through that. Okay, so as I was just saying, you have your cross or your self. So cross is 2 plants, self-pollination is within the same plant because they have both female and male reproductive organisms. When pollination happens, that's the pollen grain landing on the actual plant. That's not fertilization. Fertilization is when the sperm and the egg, or the male and the female gametes, are going to fuse together. So when the pollen grain lands on the stigma, it's going to go down through the style, this tube here, and then it's going to go to the ovule and fertilize it. That being said, there's a double fertilization happening. So what does it mean by double fertilization? One sperm is going to fertilize the egg to produce the zygote. The other sperm is going to fertilize the other polar nuclei to produce kind of what's going to be the seed, so the nutrients growing for it. So that's what double fertilization is. One produces the zygote, one's going to produce the endosperm, which is eventually going to lead to kind of your developing seed. The whole point of your seed is to protect and nourish the embryo and to carry it to the new location. And a seed isn't going to germinate without proper ideal conditions. So enough water, the ideal temperature, and from there. And so seeds can disperse based on wind for eating the fruit. So there's different ways that you get that seed being sprouted, and that's where trees and other plants can sprout up in different locations based on how that seed is dispersed. But the whole point of the seed is to protect the embryo. The seed is not the embryo. So the embryo is part of the seed, but the whole seed is not actually the embryo. Once the seed has favorable conditions, then it's able to germinate. So start growing again. Once it's absorbed enough water. And so once you absorb enough water, you will actually see the sprouting, which is your germination, happening. And so it depends if you're looking at what type of plant on where the kind of embryo kind of comes from. Once enough water's been absorbed, the seed's going to swell and break open. The cotyledon, or the endospore, is going to break down to make sure the embryo has enough nourishment to keep growing. Then you get an early root, which is then going to start taking in water. And then the cotyledon is going to usually leave the soil. That being said, if it's a monocot or a dicot, they'll kind of, and then the monocots are going to stay in the soil, dicots are going to be released from the soil. And then as soon as chloroplasts are exposed to light, we start getting photosynthesis happening. And then the plant can keep growing and growing if it's getting the proper nutrients.